All right, this brief video is just a little bit of an explanation about what Paul Wilson's getting at when he talks about one text. So if you've read into section 1, you know that he's got this mnemonic device, the tiny dog now is mine. That's the way to remember that, in a Paul Wilson sermon there's going to be one biblical text that's going to be the foundation for the sermon, one theme, one doctrine, one need, one image, one mission, and so forth. I'll have separate videos for each of those. But this is about the assertion that a sermon should only try to deal with one biblical text. This is especially a challenge for those of us who are used to using a lectionary. The lectionary in a full sort of Episcopal or Lutheran or even some Presbyterian services means an Old Testament text, a psalm, a New Testament text, and a gospel text. And it's awfully tempting to try to touch all of those in a sermon. But I'm going to agree with Paul Wilson in this case and say one text is sufficient. A couple of things to say about that. This is a practical matter, for one, about sermon length and how much depth can be achieved in a biblical passage in the appointed time. Even if you are in a tradition that allows for sermons to be 30 or 35 or 40 minutes, the demands of the hearer, the needs of the hearer, suggest that focus is important and that trying to unpack and develop several biblical texts is bound to diffuse the focus and confuse listeners. But in most of our traditions now, sermons are more routinely 9, 10, 11, 12 minutes long. And to try to develop or get into exegete or do little studies of more than one Bible passage is really not practical. Because remember, your audience is listening. They're not reading. They don't have any material to support them. They can only take in what they can take in. So one text, I think, is a great discipline. And another aspect of this is that this is a matter of focus on the one hand, but also in another sense, once you've introduced two Bible passages to a sermon, you have now introduced an extra scriptural element. That is, by some manner of judgment, you or the lectionary have decided that these two scripture passages are related, which they may or may not be in and of themselves, but also they are related to a larger theme. And what happens now is that the larger topic or theme begins to control the sermon rather than the biblical text itself. So once another biblical text is brought in as a co-worker with the main text, you have now moved out of scriptural preaching and into another category of preaching, topical preaching, where these two texts support the topic. There's nothing wrong with topical preaching, so don't hear me saying that. But for the purposes of this method, we're going to try to stick with the idea that there's only one text that really forms and informs a sermon. This is not to say that other Bible passages are forbidden from being mentioned as supporting material, only that the sermon on pages 1 and 3 should have as their backdrop just one text in the main. The other thing I would say is that although it's tempting to try to address every Bible passage that's read in worship, it's also okay just to read texts in worship and let them stand on their own. The Bible does not need you to defend it or to explain it or to give it a reason for being in worship. So don't feel like you have to address every Bible passage that's read. Think about sticking with just one text. All right, that concludes this brief exposition of the one text piece of the Wilson method.